Hey folks, and welcome back to the Leeds Gamer. Quite a bit to get through on this. This is just based on a few things that I've seen talked about on Sky Sports News and Talk Sport, these kind of things. Um, so I'm going to cover a few points here. The first point being that the latest candidate to replace Igor Tudor at Tottenham Hotspur is former Brighton manager Roberto De Zerbi. Now, initially, from what I'd heard, De Zerbi wasn't interested in taking over just for a handful of games. If he was going to take over, he wanted to do it at the start of the season. Nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of managers feel that way in terms of just knowing that they've got a little bit of stability, they've got a chance to have a summer transfer window, all of that kind of thing. However, it's since come out that Tottenham Hotspur have gone to the desperation of offering De Zerbi a very lucrative bonus if he can keep Tottenham in the Premier League. A little bit similar to what Leeds tried doing with Sam Allardyce a couple of seasons ago, but the big difference with this is that Allardyce only had 4 games, and the games that Allardyce had remaining had some beastly fixtures. It was always going to be exceedingly difficult. For anyone that comes in at Tottenham, they've got nearly double that. So there's a little bit more chance to implement ideas and to potentially try and get some kind of effort out of the current squad. But De Zerbi is a controversial appointment. He can be hot-headed with the powers that be at different clubs. He basically had a fallout at Brighton. That was the main reason he left Brighton. And realistically, you know, when you've got a club like Tottenham who have got a group of players who don't seem to know their arse from their elbow, quite frankly, and have a reasonably sizable injury list, and effectively they haven't had a win in 2026 in the Premier League. It really begs the question as to whether De Zerbi is the right short-term appointment. It recently came out that Sean Dyche kind of laughed off the idea. This was Dyche speaking to someone on TalkSport a day or two ago. And Dyche has been seen as kind of like a modern day Allardyce in the sense of him being a coach that will take things back to basics in an attempt to get a team to start getting the relevant points to stay up. But it sounds as if Dyche has been, well, he's kind of ruled himself out really. And it seems that they've been able to either Chinese burn or twist the arm of De Zerbi to potentially come in. So, according to Alex Crook at TalkSport, they basically are saying that an offer has been put in place for De Zerbi. It's just a case of how soon he will take that offer up. Bearing in mind that he's only going to have about 9 or 10 days to be able to implement his initial ideas, at least, into the squad, and then see if he can get a tune out of him when the international break finishes, and then it's all hands to the pump. This is the final international break before the end of the season. It's league or nothing, along with, you know, European competition for some clubs that are still involved in Europe as well. So, in my opinion, I don't think De Zerbi is the right person to keep Spurs up. I think if he does get appointed, I just think he's too much of a live wire, and you know, you've had what was seemingly quite a decent, quite a nice fella in Thomas Frank. You had a strict disciplinarian in Igor Tudor, and now you're going on to a bit of a live wire in Roberto De Zerbi. So they're certainly trying different personalities. There's no doubt about that. But realistically, I mean, the other people that have been mentioned, again, as I mentioned, Daesh is one of them. Bringing back Ryan Mason, who was obviously a former player and former caretaker manager on numerous occasions. There was rumours they were wanting Sherwood at one point, or certainly the fans wanted him. The fans were wanting Harry Redknapp. Even Gus Poyet probably has been at least in the betting at some point or other. Again, another former player and manager. But there's all, Abby Summers has been saying how they need to bring someone in that knows the club. And so again, at that point then you're looking at former players like Robbie Keane and Ledley King, along with Redknapp, who, again has been a former manager there. So there's all these names being banded around. But realistically, who really could step in at this stage of the season and do something that no other manager has been able to do with Tottenham Hotspur this season and actually get them to be half decent. So this then got me thinking, how many managers have all the clubs had this season? And this was actually taken from one of these quizzes. You got like 10 minutes to type in all of the managers that have been a manager in the Premier League this season to the current date, and I was able to get all of them, apart from a couple of the caretaker ones, of which I did Google because I still had time to go. But when you look at it, look at the clubs and look at how many managers have been involved this season, for each club. The clubs that have only had one manager are Arsenal, they're top of the league, Villa vying for Champions League, Bournemouth mid-table, Brentford trying to get into Europe, Brighton lower mid-table. Burnley have been in a relegation zone, but that's purely down to the fact that their squad ain't good enough. It's not really much of an indictment on whether Parker's any good. I don't think Parker's that good personally, but he's got, at least in my eyes, he's got the worst squad on paper in the entire division. Who else has had one? You've got Palace, who are mid-table, but it was announced earlier in the season that Glasner's going at the end of the season, so that doesn't really help him. Everton went back to Moyes, didn't they? He's been there for umpteen seasons previously. Silva's doing a good job with Fulham. As we know, Farke has been at the Leeds wheel for a couple of years now, and he's doing well. Slot not doing as well this season as he did last season, obviously. Guardiola had been there an age. Who else has just had one? Eddie Howe, Newcastle. I mean, they've had a pretty dodgy season by their account. They're nowhere near relegation, but they're nowhere near Europe either. Labris has done very well at Sunderland, obviously. And that's it. So there's not many of those teams that have had just one manager that are actually doing bad this season. The one exception is probably Burnley. But again, that's not down to Scott Parker or you could have any manager in at Burnley. They're not going to get a tune out of that team in terms of a quality performance because they just haven't got the quality in the squad. It's that simple. So in terms of all the other teams that have had more than one, then whereabouts are they in the division? So starting with Chelsea, fans aren't happy with Rosenia. They got rid of Maresca. McFarlane came in for a game or two. They got Rosenia from one of their sister clubs, and he's kind of doing okay without being spectacular. Chelsea have a very young squad, so they haven't got any leaders in the squad really, which is probably why they're nowhere near challenging for the title. Who else has had more than one? Manure, they're doing surprisingly well considering. Amorim was rubbish last season, but they kept him on for a little while this season. But again, they didn't really, Amorim and the Manure board didn't get on, so that came to an end. And then Fletcher took a couple of games. He might have played his two sons in those games. I can't even remember now. And then Carrick's kind of taken over on an interim basis ever since. But Carrick's been able to steady the ship and keep Manure in a top four position really ever since. Nottingham Forest, dreadful season really. Went from being a team that qualified for Europe to a team that's now fighting against relegation. And again, you've got to just look at all them coaches they've had. Santo, Postecoglou, Dyche, Pereira. Pereira was managing Wolves, who were bottom of the league and looking dreadful. Dyche, he's managed almost everybody in the bottom half up to this point, it feels. Postecoglou had done quite well before Forest, but he just couldn't get a tune out of the Forest squad, and it might have even been a fallout with Marinakis, the owner, and it wasn't any better with Santo either. Pereira, I think Forest probably will stick with Pereira at least until the end of the season. Whether they stick with him beyond this summer, I don't know. Tottenham, they've only had two managers up to now, but 2025 was average, but then 2026 has been a disaster. They sacked Frank, bring Tudor in. Tudor doesn't get a Premier League win in his short time at the club. They get rid of him, and now it looks like De Zerbi might come in. West Ham, two managers this season as well. Rubbish under Potter, which kind of did the damage. They bring in Santo, and slowly but surely they've clawed that gap up a little bit. And ultimately now they are, within touching distance of Tottenham now. They're only a point behind, but they do still find themselves in 18th. And then Wolves, who have been dreadful all season, started with Pereira. They were on track for being the worst team in Premier League history. Pereira gets sacked. James Collins comes in for a match or two, and then Rob Edwards comes in and actually starts improving the form a little bit for Wolves. It was just too little, too late in the end for Wolves really. Both them and Burnley are absolutely doomed. But Wolves, after a little bit of a settling in period for Edwards, there is no doubt they have improved a bit. So when you look at the number of managers that have been at some of the clubs this season, the ones that have had multiple, there aren't many that are doing well. And you look at the size of the clubs that, and where those particular clubs are that have had multiple managers, you expect Chelsea to be, top 5 as a minimum. You expect Man United to be top 5 as a minimum. Who else has had multiples? You expect Tottenham to be top 5. Forest, I don't think anyone expected them to be anywhere near as good this season, but I don't think they expected them to be near the bottom of the league either. And I don't think anyone expected much of Wolves after they only just scraped survival last season. So, all of these managers that have been around so far, there's been a lot of movement. Now, one of the reasons that I think that my club Leeds will stay up is because they're likely to stick with Daniel Farke for the entire season. It's continuity. The squad are all his players, or 90% of them. There's a handful of the current squad that were there before Daniel Farke came in. But this squad has had enough time under Farke to adapt to Farke's methods, buy into his style, and this is one of the reasons why Leeds have been very difficult to beat, hence why we've drawn so many games. And this is why I think Leeds will stay up. Now, something that was mentioned on TalkSport by former striker Darren Ben, he was mentioning to Goldstein that he reckons that he would like a sack window. And this was around the topic of, should there be a limit to the number of managerial sackings that are allowed? Now, you could effectively put a limit on the number of sackings that would be allowed by implementing a sack window. Now, it's initially when you talk about something like a sack window, it sounds ludicrous, doesn't it? But when you think of it a little bit of a wider picture, now I don't really agree with a lot of the stuff that Darren Bent comes out with. But this is probably one of the most intelligent things he's ever come out with. When you look at, and Leeds have been through it, with Allardyce and Gracia just before him. They were at the club for a very short time. And Leeds are one of the clubs that have had very short tenures, like Rossler and Okaday, and Milinik. Just to name a few more that only lasted at the club for, like, some of those only lasted 6 matches. Allardyce only lasted, I think, 4. With Allardyce there was only 4 games remaining, so it's a bit of a different scenario for Sam Allardyce. But just imagine if there was a sack window. So like how you've got a transfer window of where you can sign players, which traditionally is the summer, and then the month of January. Would it not be possible to implement those 2 particular periods of the season to be periods where clubs, if they wanted to, could change their manager? That to me, I think that would be doable. And that way then you're pretty much guaranteeing that managers are going to get at least half a season in charge of whichever club it is. And it's then down to them to prove their worth. I honestly don't mind the idea. I know it sounds daft, and I don't know of anyone that has ever suggested it before, but I like the idea. It's one of these where, if a club starts a season really badly, and so, taking the 25-26 season, so the 25 part of the 25-26 season, if you start with a new manager, or you start with a particular manager at the start of that season, and things are going really bad for you by Christmas, that January is the time then when you can sack your manager and say, right, we're struggling under you, we need someone new. And you've then got the month of January to get somebody else in, which still gives them then the chance to be able to maybe sign a couple of their own players if finances dictate. But I think if I was to implement that rule, I think that's how I'd do it. If I was to implement a sack window, because that way then you are limiting the number of managers that would get sacked in a season. I wouldn't mind it. it removes a lot of uncertainty. It brings a little bit of continuity, and in some clubs' situations and some managers' situations brings a bit of stability. So yeah, there we go, folks. Just thought I'd touch on all of this and you know, just go through a bit of the information about it, because as I say, it's been talked about quite a bit on Sky Sports, football, and Talksport. So yeah, put your opinions in the comments down below regarding all of this. You know, would a sack window work? Should there be a limit on it? Is De Zerbi the right man for Spurs? I don't know. Let me know. A big thank you for watching. Do please hit the like button, hit the hype as well if it's available. Do please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and do please hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future content. But in the meantime, have a good one. See you next time. Bye for now.